The world outside my basement had ceased to exist days ago. Down here, the only constants were the low, reverent hum of the server rack, my choir, and the rhythmic click of my keyboard, a language I understood better than English. The air tasted of stale coffee, dust, and the faint electric tang of ozone. This was my sanctuary, my forge. This was where I was building God. Not a literal one, of course. I deal in logic, not faith. My creation, Project Chimera, was an adaptive neural interface, a symbiotic bridge between the human mind and complex systems. It wasn't just about thinking a command and having a machine execute it. That was child's play. Chimera learned. It anticipated. It fused with the user's intuition until the line between flesh and machine blurred into a seamless, elegant whole. It was a new nervous system for humanity, and after 12 years of 20-hour days, of missed holidays and birthdays, of being a ghost in my own Palo Alto home, it was finally finished. My fingers, extensions of my will, danced across the keyboard. The final lines of code flowed out of me, not as a conscious effort, but as a final, exhaled breath, a recursive function for error correction. So beautiful in its simplicity, it was almost poetry. "You're going to burn your eyes out, Mark." The voice was soft, pulling me gently from the digital abyss. I didn't turn. I knew the scent of her jasmine lotion, the quiet shuffle of her slippers on the concrete floor. Lisa. My API to humanity, the one who translated the chaotic, illogical world for me, so I could focus on building better ones. She placed a warm ceramic mug next to my hand. Fresh coffee. The aroma cut through the sterile air of the room. "It's almost 3 a.m., she murmured, her hand coming to rest on my shoulder. Her touch was the only input I never needed to process. It bypassed my logic centers and went straight to some core, primal part of my being. "Almost there, Lee," I said, my eyes still locked on the cascade of text on the main monitor. "The final compile. Then it's just the lawyers in the morning." "Our lawyers," she corrected gently. "Our future." I allowed myself a small smile. She always did that. Framed my solitary obsessions as our shared journey. Without her, Chimera would still be a chaotic mess of notes on a whiteboard. She managed the grants, the NDAs, the single brilliant engineer ID hired and then let go when the work became too sensitive. She managed me. She was the operating system for my life, and she ran flawlessly. I leaned back, the joints in my neck cracking a protest. I finally looked at her. Even in the stark blue-white glow of the monitors, she was beautiful. The kind of effortless beauty that made people stop and listen, that opened doors my quiet, awkward presence could never unlatch. "It's done, Lee," I whispered, the words feeling momentous, heavy. "It's really done." Chinum, a genuine, brilliant smile spread across her face. "I never doubted you for a second," she said, squeezing my shoulder. "Now run the program. Let's see our baby take its first breath." I turned back to the screen, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it. My finger hovered over the Enter key. This wasn't just compiling code. This was unleashing a new paradigm. This was the moment that would divide my life, and maybe the world, into a before and an after. I pressed the key. The fans in the server rack spun up, their hum rising to a rushing roar. Lines of text flew across the diagnostic screen, a blur of verification and execution. The system wasn't just processing commands. It was checking its own work, testing its own nascent consciousness. It was like watching a billion neurons fire in perfect sequence. For 67 seconds, the world held its breath. Then, silence. The fans spooled down to their normal hum. And on the main screen, a single perfect line of green text appeared. Chimera kernel v1. 0. Compile successful. System stable. A wave of pure, uncut euphoria washed over me, so potent it left me dizzy. I had done it. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and wrapped my arms around Lisa. I buried my face in her hair, inhaling her scent. The only real thing in a world I was about to reshape from the ground up. We did it. I breathed into her ear. "Yes, my love," she whispered back, her arms holding me tight. We did. In that moment, standing in the cold glow of my creation, I felt an absolute, unshakable certainty. I had built a perfect system, a flawless piece of code that would change the world, and I had a perfect partner to share it with. In a universe of infinite, chaotic variables, she was my one constant, my truth. Sleep, when it finally came, was a shallow, dreamless state, a system reboot that lasted less than 3 hours. But I woke up feeling a clarity I hadn't known in years. The weight was gone. The marathon was over. I stretched, my body aching with a satisfying soreness, and walked upstairs from the basement into the sun-drenched quiet of our kitchen. Lisa was already there, a silhouette against the large window overlooking our manicured backyard. She was on the phone, her voice a low, happy murmur. She'd laid out a clean shirt and pants for me on a chair. She'd made coffee, the rich, dark aroma filling the space, the algorithm of a perfect morning. She saw me, smiled, and mouthed 5 minutes before turning her attention back to her call, walking out onto the patio. I poured myself a mug of the coffee. It was perfect. She knew exactly how I liked it. Of course she did. She knew everything about me. For background noise, I flicked on the wall-mounted television, tuning it to CNBC. The usual parade of talking heads discussing market fluctuations I no longer had to care about. Soon, I'd be the one moving the markets, not just watching them. I took a sip of coffee, the warmth spreading through my chest, and leaned against the cool granite of the kitchen island, feeling, for the first time, like the master of my own universe. That was when the breaking news banner flashed across the screen in stark, aggressive red. The anchor's face was a mask of professional urgency. "We're cutting live to a press conference from Ethelred Innovations," she announced, where CEO Julian Thorne is set to make what his company is calling a paradigm-shifting announcement. I felt a prickle of annoyance. Julian Thorne, a man who sold vaporware with the conviction of a prophet, a master of hype and marketing, whose technical expertise was limited to choosing the right Instagram filter. Whatever he was announcing, it would be smoke and mirrors. His face filled the screen, smug and perfectly tanned. He stood at a podium, the Ethelred logo, a stylized A that always looked vaguely predatory, projected behind him. "For decades," he began, his voice resonating with practiced charisma, "we have viewed technology as a tool. Something separate from us. We command, it obeys. But what if that wall could come down? What if technology could become a true partner, an extension of our own intuition?" I froze, the mug halfway to my lips. His words, they were familiar. "Today," Thorne boomed, his arms spreading wide, "Ethelred is proud to introduce the next step in human evolution, a fully adaptive, symbiotic neural interface that doesn't just read your thoughts. It learns your soul. We call it Project Prometheus. The mug slipped from my fingers. It didn't shatter. It hit the polished hardwood floor with a dull, final thud, a perfect circle of dark coffee spreading like blood. I didn't hear the sound. I couldn't hear anything over the roaring in my ears. On the screen, a graphic appeared, an animation of a human brain seamlessly connecting with a lattice of light. It was a simplified, commercialized version of my own diagnostic display. Using a proprietary AI core, Thorne continued, his voice a distant drone, Prometheus creates an intuitive bond, allowing for instantaneous, seamless control of any complex system. He kept talking, but I wasn't listening to the words anymore. I was hearing my own voice, speaking those exact phrases to Lisa in the quiet of the night, sketching out the marketing pitch on a napkin while she smiled and nodded, telling me it was brilliant. It learns your soul. My words, my poetry, stolen and recited by a charlatan on global television. The world tilted. For a moment, the structured, logical universe I inhabited collapsed into a singularity of pure, white-hot noise. A system crash. Blue screen of death for the soul. Then, just as quickly, the noise receded. The emotion, the shock, the betrayal, the searing pain was partitioned off, quarantined behind a firewall of pure, cold logic. My brain, the one that built Chimera, did what it was designed to do. It debugged the situation. Hypothesis: a breach has occurred. Data point 1, the core concepts, architecture, and even marketing language of Chimera have been replicated. Data point 2, the timing is too perfect. They filed their provisional patent just days before I was scheduled to. This wasn't industrial espionage. This was a complete data transfer. I moved. My body felt disconnected, an automaton executing a subroutine. Back down to the basement, to my sanctuary. Now, a crime scene. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my personal fluency returning. I initiated a full diagnostic and security audit. I scanned every line of code for malware, for Trojans, for backdoors. Nothing. The system was pristine, a closed loop. I checked the network logs. No unauthorized access. Not a single ping on the firewall. The physical security was absolute. The server room was shielded and accessible only by my thumbprint. The data was irrefutable. The breach was not external. It was internal. An inventory of assets. Who had access? Me and Lisa. She had the admin passwords, just in case. She'd helped me set up the cloud backups, encrypted on a private server. She had seen every blueprint, every algorithm, every line of code. She was the only other node in the system, the only variable. My mind raced, assembling fragments of memory. Her frequent girls' nights out. Her sudden interest in burner phones for privacy from big tech. The expensive handbag she'd bought herself, saying she'd found an amazing deal. 1,000 tiny anomalies I had dismissed as illogical, unimportant data points. I walked back upstairs, past the coffee stain on the floor, and into our bedroom. The room felt alien, a stage set for a life that was no longer mine. Her closet, perfectly organized, her jewelry box, orderly, her side of the bed, neatly made. My eyes scanned the room, searching for the flaw in the code, and then I saw it. Under a pile of expensive silk scarves in her lingerie drawer, a place of manufactured intimacy, was a sleek, black burner phone. The one she said she'd gotten rid of months ago. My hands were steady as I picked it up. Standard encryption. A 6-digit PIN. Child's play. I connected it to a diagnostic tool on my own phone. 97 seconds later, I was in. The archive of my own destruction was laid bare. It wasn't just texts. It was everything. Years of it. Photos of her and Thorn, laughing on a boat, kissing in a hotel room in Napa, voicemails. But the core of it was the data transfers. Every time I had a breakthrough, she would summarize it in a text. Every algorithm I perfected, she would photograph the whiteboard and send it. I found the audio file. My own voice, recorded secretly, excitedly explaining the final recursive function to her just last night, and her reply to Thorn, sent while I slept. The golden goose just laid its last egg. We are go. Then came the texts that broke me, not the ones about my work, but the ones about me. Julian, is he still locked in his cave? Lisa, of course, tapping away. He thinks I'm his guardian angel. It's almost pathetic. Julian, just a few more days, baby. Then you can trade in your pet genius for a king. Lisa, he told me tonight that I'm his one constant. He has no idea his constant has been a variable all along. I sank down onto the edge of the bed, the phone heavy in my hand. It wasn't a love affair. It was a corporate merger, and I was the asset being liquidated. They hadn't just stolen my work. They had mined my love, extracted my trust, and stripped my life for parts. They had taken everything. In the silence of the bedroom, staring at the screen, a new process began to run in the background of my mind. The shock was being overwritten. The pain was being compiled into something else, something cold, efficient, and utterly relentless. The system hadn't just crashed. It was rebooting with a new, singular objective. I didn't confront her. There was no screaming match, no throwing of plates, no cathartic release of primal rage. That would have been a human response, and the part of me that was merely human was now offline. I walked back down to the basement, the burner phone in my pocket, a cold, dense weight against my thigh. I placed it on my workstation next to the mug of now cold coffee she had brought me, 2 artifacts from a dead civilization. The monitors were still displaying the success message, system stable, a bitter digital irony. I sat there for what might have been an hour or a decade. Time had become an irrelevant metric. I wasn't thinking. I was processing. The Lisa I knew, the warm, supportive, loving woman who was my anchor in the real world, had never existed. She was a user interface, a beautifully designed facade hiding malicious code. All our shared memories, the inside jokes, the quiet moments of intimacy, were not bugs in her program. They were features. Social engineering of the highest order, designed to keep the primary asset, me, docile and productive. The rage was there, of course. It was a vast, silent ocean beneath the ice of my logic. But it wasn't the hot, explosive anger of a betrayed husband. It was the cold, focused fury of an engineer watching someone use his creation for a purpose so vile, so antithetical to its design, that the only logical response was to dismantle them both, piece by piece, until nothing remained but wreckage. I scrolled through the phone's archive again, this time not as a victim, but as a systems analyst. I wasn't reading love letters. I was studying a hostile network's architecture. I mapped their communication patterns, their security protocols, laughably weak, their financial transactions. I saw the shell corporation Thorn had set up for Lisa, the offshore account where the first payment had been deposited. It was a long-term, meticulously planned operation. and they thought it was over. They thought they had won. They saw me as the brilliant but fragile creator, a social inadequate who would crumble under the weight of this betrayal. Their plan, I realized, accounted for my genius, but not for my resilience. They had mistaken my quietness for weakness, my focus for fragility. It was a fatal miscalculation. I looked at the code for Chimera, still open on my main monitor. Thousands of lines of elegant, intricate logic. They had a copy of it, a snapshot in time. They had the blueprints for a skyscraper. But they didn't understand the foundation. They didn't know about the load-bearing walls, the hidden redundancies, the kill switches I had woven into its very DNA. I never build a system without backdoors. It's a matter of principle. You always give yourself a way back in. They had downloaded the program. I was the operating system, and I was about to initiate a forced format. A new plan began to spool in my mind, a complex algorithm of retribution. It would not be swift. It would not be loud. It would be a cascade failure, a series of seemingly unrelated events that would slowly, inexorably lead to their total implosion. I would not attack their creation, Prometheus. I would attack their reality. I would deconstruct their lives with the same methodical precision I used to build my code. First, I had to erase the old Mark Sterling, the broken, cuckolded genius. He was a liability. I went back upstairs. The coffee stain on the floor seemed to mock me. I found a bottle of expensive scotch, a gift from Lisa, no doubt, for some milestone, and poured a significant amount down the sink. I splashed some on my clothes on the floor. I took a blank sheet of paper and scrawled a few lines, my handwriting intentionally erratic, a perfect simulation of a mind in chaos. I can't. The work, my whole life, and you. How could you? It's all gone. I'm gone. I left it on the kitchen island, next to the upended coffee mug I retrieved from the floor. I packed a small, nondescript bug-out bag I'd prepared years ago, a habit from my early, more paranoid days. Cash, fake IDs I'd engineered for a security conference presentation years ago, a set of crypto keys, a ghost laptop with a custom OS. Then I performed the final, most crucial step. I walked to the main breaker panel in the garage and killed the power to the entire house, except for the dedicated circuit to my basement. The servers would stay on. Chimera's heart would keep beating. Then I triggered the silent alarm connected to my private security firm, an alert coded as a potential suicide risk. The response time would be 7 minutes. I walked out the back door, slipping through the manicured garden that Lisa had spent so much time on. As I disappeared into the manicured anonymity of the Palo Alto suburbs, I heard the distant wail of sirens approaching. Let them find the staged scene. Let Lisa play the part of the distraught, concerned wife for the police. Let Thorne read the news and feel a flicker of smug satisfaction that the loose end had neatly tied itself off. They thought they were closing a chapter, but they had no idea that the architect of their ruin was just getting started. As I walked into the fading light of the day, a single thought echoed in the new, cold silence of my mind. They stole my code, so I will debug their lives, and the first step in any debugging process is to isolate the error. Palo Alto is a city of facades. Perfectly landscaped lawns, minimalist glass and steel houses, Teslas whispering silently down pristine streets. It's a carefully curated illusion of a friction-free world. I had lived inside that illusion for 15 years. Leaving it was like stepping out of a simulation into the gritty, unrendered reality of the real world. My destination was a place that existed on no official records, tied to Mark Sterling. A pre-war brick loft in a forgotten industrial corner of Oakland, overlooking the grimy artery of the port. ID bought it a decade ago through a multi-layered series of anonymous LLCs, an escape hatch ID built on the principle that any robust system needs a failsafe. ID furnished it with nothing but the essentials: a mattress on the floor, a single chair, and a commercial-grade fiber optic line connected directly to the West Coast internet backbone. It was an anonymous shell, a ghost address. It was perfect. The first 48 hours were a system purge. I didn't work. I didn't plan. I let the raw, unprocessed data of the betrayal wash over me. The pain, the humiliation, the white-hot anger. I let it burn, not to consume me, but to forge me into something new. The old Mark Sterling was a collaborative processor. He trusted. He shared. He loved. That version of the code was hopelessly corrupt. It had to be deleted. By the third day, the emotional storm had passed. What remained was a landscape of crystalline clarity. My new operating parameters were simple. 1. Isolate the targets, Julian Thorne and Lisa Sterling. 2. Deconstruct their operational infrastructure, financial, professional, and personal. 3. Execute a controlled demolition. 4. Leave no trace. The first step was to become a ghost. Mark Sterling, the reclusive tech genius, had conveniently had a public breakdown. I amplified that narrative. Using a series of encrypted relays and public Wi-Fi hotspots, I accessed a dormant social media account I'd created years ago under a pseudonym. I started posting on obscure coding forums and Reddit threads, my posts becoming increasingly erratic and paranoid, hinting at vast corporate conspiracies. I was creating a digital breadcrumb trail for anyone who might look for me, a trail that led to a dead-end portrait of a man who had lost his mind. While the world was looking for a broken man, a new one was being born in that Oakland loft. I shaved my head. I let the stubble on my face grow into a rough, unkempt beard. My uniform of gray hoodies was replaced by generic work shirts and jeans bought from a Walmart. I started running, hardening a body that had grown soft behind a desk. In the mirror, a stranger looked back at me, someone with my eyes, but his gaze was different, colder, more focused. The soft, questioning look of the academic was gone, replaced by the flat, appraising stare of a predator. My real work began with reconnaissance, total, invasive, digital immersion. Lisa and Thorne believed my disappearance had removed the only threat. Their security posture was sloppy, arrogant. Thorne used the same password, Ethelred King, for his corporate email, his personal bank account, and his home security system. It took me less than an hour to own his entire digital life. Lisa was more careful, but she had made a critical error. She had linked her new phone to the same private cloud account she used for our old family photos. She thought she was being sentimental. I knew she was being lazy. I didn't need to crack her phone. I just restored the backup to a virtual device on my own server. Suddenly I had everything. Her texts, her call logs, her location data, her calendar. For weeks I did nothing but watch and listen. I became a silent passenger in their lives. I saw their victory celebration at a Michelin star restaurant in San Francisco. Their champagne toasts to a future built on my bones. I listened through Thorne's laptop microphone as he arrogantly dismissed his lead engineer's concerns about the unorthodox structure of the Prometheus Code. "The genius who wrote it was a flake," Thorne had laughed. "We're just cleaning up his mess." I watched them argue. The first cracks in their alliance were already showing. Lisa was pushing for a larger equity stake, for a public title. Thorne was placating her, making promises he clearly had no intention of keeping. Their partnership was not built on trust. It was a transaction, and both parties were already looking for a way to cheat the other. This was the vulnerability I had been looking for. A system's greatest weakness is rarely technical. It's almost always human. Greed, ego, distrust. These were the programming flaws I would exploit. They thought they had stolen a machine from me. They had no idea that in doing so, they had handed me the manual to their own. My plan began to take shape, no longer a vague desire for revenge, but a precise, multi-stage operation. It was time to introduce the first Trojan horse into their victorious city. Every complex system has an exploit. In software, it's a hidden vulnerability in the code. In human beings, it's ego. Thorne's team of engineers, while competent, were now custodians of a cathedral they hadn't built. They understood the facade, but not the deep, underlying architecture of Chimera, or as they called it, Prometheus. I knew my own code better than I knew my own face. Before I ever considered the final version complete, I had stress-tested it for months. During that process, I had intentionally left behind a single elegant flaw. It was a highly sophisticated, non-critical memory leak, buried deep within a subroutine that managed data visualization. It wouldn't cause a system crash. It would be almost undetectable in the short term, but over time, under heavy processing loads, it would cause subtle graphical glitches, a momentary flicker, a slight data lag. It was insignificant, a cosmetic bug. But to a team of engineers trying to prove their worth by improving the original code, it would be an irresistible puzzle. It was my Easter egg, and I had already written the patch for it. The patch was a masterpiece of misdirection. On the surface, it was a clean, efficient piece of code that appeared to solve the memory leak. But nested within its compiled binary, obfuscated beyond the skill of Thorne as team to unravel, was my true payload. It was a key, a rootkit that once installed would give me persistent, privileged access to Ethelred's entire network, completely invisible to their security protocols. It wouldn't just open a door, it would make me a part of the building's foundation. Now, I needed a delivery system. A direct hack was too noisy. I needed them to install it themselves. I needed to exploit their pride. Through my surveillance of Thorne's network, I identified my target, a senior programmer named David Chen. Chen was brilliant, ambitious, and deeply resentful of Thorne's technical ignorance. His internal emails to a colleague were filled with complaints about being forced to work on this black box of a codebase. He was desperate to make a mark, to prove he understood the Flake's genius better than anyone. He was the perfect vector. I created a new online persona, Archimedes X, a mysterious gray hat hacker. I built a plausible history for this persona over several weeks, contributing insightful solutions to complex problems on high-level, invitation-only coding forums, the kind of places a programmer like Chen would frequent to keep his skills sharp. I established a reputation for elegant, almost prescient problem-solving. Then I waited for the right moment. Ethelred was preparing for a major demo for a group of early-stage investors. The pressure was on. I knew from listening to their internal communications that they would be running the system at maximum capacity for days in preparation. My memory leak bug would start to manifest. Right on schedule, a frantic email from Chen to his team appeared on my screen. Has anyone else noticed the slight rendering lag in the NeuroSim display? It's minor, but it's there. Thorne will have a fit if the demo isn't flawless. The bait was in the water. That night, Archimedes X made a post on the private forum. It was a theoretical discussion about memory management in adaptive AI systems. I described a hypothetical problem, a rare but fascinating type of memory leak that would produce the exact symptoms Chen was seeing. I framed it as a purely academic puzzle. Within an hour, Chen took the bait. He replied to the thread, "Fascinating. We're seeing something similar in a new architecture. Any thoughts on a solution?" I let him wait for 6 hours, letting his anxiety build. Then, Archimedes X replied, "The architecture is unorthodox, but the solution should be straightforward. The flaw is likely in the recursive data caching function. You'd need a multi-threaded patch that pre-allocates memory buffers. Something like this." I posted the code. My Trojan horse. It looked perfect, clean, clever, and exactly the kind of elegant solution a brilliant programmer would devise. I knew Chen's ego wouldn't allow him to just copy and paste it. He would analyze it. He would test it in a sandbox environment. He would convince himself he understood it, and he would find nothing. The malicious code was buried layers deep, a ghost in the machine. 2 days later, just before the investor demo, I watched through Ethelred's internal network as Chen triumphantly presented his fix to the programming team. He took full credit for it, of course, explaining how he'd independently devised the solution after days of intense work. Thorne, who understood none of it, clapped him on the back and told him he'd earned his bonus. The patch was compiled and pushed to the main server. In my dark Oakland loft, I watched my own screen. A single line of text appeared in my custom terminal. Root access granted, Ethelred Corp network, stealth mode active. I leaned back in my chair, a cold, thin smile touching my lips for the first time in months. The walls of Troy had been breached, not by force, but by invitation. They had willingly carried the instrument of their own destruction past their gates, celebrating their own cleverness as they did it. I had the keys to their kingdom. Now I wouldn't be a spectator. I would be God, an invisible, all-seeing deity in their machine, free to watch, to listen, and when the time was right, to pass judgment. Gaining access was not the victory. It was the opening move. A premature strike, no matter how damaging, would be unsophisticated. It would be an act of passion, not strategy. My goal wasn't just to tear them down. It was to have them dismantle their own empire, brick by brick, without ever realizing my hand was guiding theirs. For the next 3 months, I became the ghost in their machine. I lived in their data streams, a silent, omniscient observer. My loft in Oakland became the nerve center of a one-man intelligence agency. The wall above my monitors was a tapestry of connections, a map of their lives charted in photographs, encrypted notes, and financial diagrams. I was no longer an engineer. I was a cartographer of their souls, and I was discovering that their landscape was a barren wasteland of greed and deceit. I didn't just read their emails. I cross-referenced them with their calendars, their credit card statements, and their GPS locations. I didn't just listen to their calls. I used voice recognition software to flag keywords: investors, SEC, Lisa's cut, creating a searchable, indexed archive of their conspiracy. I watched through the cameras on their laptops, not for voyeuristic pleasure, but to study their micro-expressions, to see the flash of fear in Thorne's eyes when a quarterly report looked weak, to see the flicker of contempt on Lisa's face when he spoke to her with condescending affection. I learned that Thorne wasn't just a corporate thief, he was a serial fraudster. Ethelred Innovations was built on a foundation of lies. He was promising investors results based on my work, but he was also cooking the books, inflating user engagement projections, and channeling company funds into personal real estate ventures through a network of shell companies. He was running a classic Silicon Valley pump and dump scheme, and Prometheus was meant to be his crowning jewel, the final spectacular lie before he cashed out, leaving everyone else in the wreckage. And Lisa, watching her was like observing a different species, one that perfectly mimicked human emotion without possessing any. My love for her, my trust in her. It had all been a long, slow con. Now, her focus was entirely on Thorne. She was a hawk circling her prey, waiting for the moment of weakness. I intercepted encrypted messages between her and a notoriously aggressive divorce attorney in San Francisco. She wasn't preparing for a breakup. She was preparing for war. She had a copy of every incriminating document she'd ever forwarded from me, and she was building a case to prove she was a co-creator of the technology, entitled to a full half of everything, not the paltry 10% stake Thorne had promised her in their secret agreement. Their alliance was a snake eating its own tail. They had united to destroy me, but their shared crime was the only thing holding them together. The paranoia was setting in. Thorne had a private investigator tailing Lisa. Lisa had installed spyware on Thorne's personal laptop. Amateur stuff, easily bypassed by me, but a clear sign of the escalating Cold War between them. I didn't interfere. I didn't leak anything. A surgeon doesn't start cutting the moment he finds the tumor. He studies the scans, understands the entire system, and plans every incision with absolute precision. I was still in the diagnostic phase. The most revealing moments came late at night. Thorne, alone in his glass-walled office, practicing his confident speeches to an empty room, his face a mask of anxiety when he thought no one was watching. Lisa, sitting in the kitchen of the house we once shared, scrolling through photos of my old, happy, oblivious self, her expression not one of remorse, but of cold calculation, like a general studying a vanquished enemy. One night, I heard a conversation that crystallized the entire endgame for me. It was Thorne on a VoIP call with his CFO. They were discussing the upcoming Series C funding round, the big one, led by a ruthless venture capital firm called Blackwood Capital. Blackwood is asking for a full technical audit, the CFO said, his voice strained. They're not like the others, Julian. These guys are sharks if they find a single discrepancy. They won't, Thorne snapped, his voice tight. We give them the demo. We give them the doctored projections. And we give them the story of the brilliant but unstable founder who couldn't handle the pressure. It's a clean narrative. By the time they have the access to find any real problems, the deal will be closed. The money will be in the bank, and we'll be planning the IPO. He paused, and his next words were a drop of ice in my veins. As for Lisa, make sure the final version of her contract is ironclad. Once Blackwood is in, Her position becomes redundant. We'll pay her the 10% and she'll disappear. She served her purpose. I saved the recording, flagging it in my archive. It was perfect. The final pieces of the puzzle were clicking into place. They weren't just going to fall, they were going to be the architects of their own annihilation. Thorn was going to defraud his investors. Lisa was going to betray Thorn, and I was going to give them just enough rope to hang each other. The observation phase was over. It was time to start introducing subtle errors into their system. It was time to sow the seeds of chaos. A system under stress reveals its hidden flaws. For 3 months I had watched their system at rest. Now it was time to apply pressure. Not with a sledgehammer, but with the subtle, cumulative force of 1,000 tiny, perfectly calibrated adjustments. I wasn't going to be a saboteur. I was going to be a ghost, a poltergeist in their server racks, a whisper of doubt in the ears of their investors. My first move was aimed at the heart of any Silicon Valley venture, the illusion of exponential growth. Ethelred was preparing its quarterly report for its early investors. Through Thorn as email, I had the draft. It was a masterpiece of creative accounting, full of vanity metrics and hockey stick projections. It was also a lie. My job was not to expose the lie, but to make it look sloppy. Deep in the appendices, in a dense table of user engagement data, I made my move. I didn't change a headline number. That would be found in a day. Instead, I altered a single formula in the spreadsheet that calculated the month-over-month growth rate. It was a subtle error in a cross-referencing cell, changing a 7 to a 9. The result was a discrepancy of only 0.02%, insignificant on its own. But it created a cascade effect, a tiny mathematical inconsistency between the summary chart on page 2 and the raw data on page 37. It was the kind of error that wouldn't be caught by Thorn or his CFO who only looked at the big picture. But it was a breadcrumb, a tiny loose thread for any diligent, low-level analyst at one of the investment firms to pull. It wasn't an accusation of fraud. It was worse. It was a suggestion of incompetence. It whispered, they don't have control of their own numbers. Next, I targeted Thorn's image. His greatest asset was his charisma, his unflappable confidence. So, I decided to unnerve him. He had a crucial video conference scheduled with a potential strategic partner in Asia. It was a 5 a.m. call for him, a time when he would be at his most vulnerable. As he launched into his pitch, his voice smooth and commanding, I began my work. I didn't cut the connection. I throttled his bandwidth, injecting just enough packet loss to make his audio stutter at key moments. When he said, "Our platform is completely static, stable," the word stable was lost in a burst of digital noise. When he shared his screen to show the sleek user interface of Prometheus, I froze the feed for 3 seconds on a slide that was misaligned, making the text look jumbled and unprofessional. Through his laptop camera, I watched him. The first time, he ignored it. The second, a flicker of annoyance crossed his face. By the third, a bead of sweat was trickling down his temple. He was losing his rhythm, his confidence eroding in real time. To the people on the other end of the call, it just looked like a bad connection. But I knew that for Thorn, a man obsessed with control, it felt like the universe was conspiring against him. The final touch was a demo for a delegation from a major defense contractor. This was a high-stakes performance. a chance to secure a lucrative government contract. The demo took place in Ethelred's showpiece conference room. I was watching through 3 different angles: the room's security camera, the laptop running the demo, and the phone of an engineer in the back of the room. As the test subject, a hand-picked Ethelred employee began manipulating a complex drone simulation using the Prometheus interface, I triggered one of my carefully planted bugs. For a single half-second, the drone on screen stuttered, its flight path deviating by a few pixels before correcting itself. Later, as the subject navigated a 3D holographic map, a string of hexadecimal code, a benign but cryptic error message I had written myself, flashed in the corner of the screen for less than a second before disappearing. No one said anything, but I saw the look exchanged between the 2 stern-faced colonels in the front row. They were buying a weapons system, not a video game. And they had just seen it twitch. The seed of doubt was planted. With these manufactured incidents creating internal chaos, I began to cultivate the external narrative. I fed anonymous tips to a handful of influential, under-the-radar tech bloggers. Not bombshells, just whispers. Hearing rumors of instability in the Prometheus platform. Chatter about Ethelred's last quarterly report having some soft spots in the data. Source says Thorne's pitch to a key Asian partner was a technical mess. I was creating a subtle, negative buzz, a cloud of uncertainty around a company that sold certainty as its main product. I watched Thorne unravel. He became a tyrant in the office, screaming at his engineering team about sloppiness and incompetence. He couldn't find the source of the problems because the problems weren't real. They were phantoms, perfectly timed and executed illusions. He was a man trying to fight a ghost, the ghost that he had created. And in my Oakland loft, I watched him. A cold, quiet satisfaction settling over me. The system was becoming unstable. The echoes I had created in his walls were growing louder, and soon they would be loud enough to bring the whole house down. Every system has a single point of failure. For Ethelred, that point was Blackwood Capital. They weren't just investors. They were corporate executioners, famous for their brutal due diligence and their habit of replacing founders with their own hand-picked CEOs the moment a company faltered. Securing their $500 million investment was Thorne's entire endgame. It was the validation he craved, the golden parachute that would make him untouchable. It was also the precipice over which I intended to push him. Through my complete access to his digital life, I watched him prepare for the Blackwood pitch like a general planning an invasion. He hired presentation coaches, commissioned market analyses that were more fiction than fact, and drove his team to the brink of collapse. The pressure was immense, and it was forcing the cracks in his unholy alliance with Lisa into gaping chasms. Lisa, for her part, was playing the role of the supportive partner flawlessly in public. But in private, she was a viper coiling to strike. I watched her digital footprint with fascination. She was spending hours on legal databases, researching precedents for intellectual property disputes between unincorporated partners. She had engaged a forensic accounting firm, paying them in cash, to find the offshore shells where she suspected Thorne was hiding money. She believed Thorne was her only enemy, her final obstacle. She had no idea she was just a pawn in a much larger game. The linchpin of my plan came from a place I hadn't expected. It wasn't in a corporate server or an encrypted email. It was in the cloud backup of Thorne's car, a high-end German sedan that recorded all its in-cabin audio for quality assurance purposes. Thorne, in his infinite arrogance, had never disabled the feature. One evening, after a particularly grueling meeting with his lawyers, he was driving home. He made a call to his lead attorney, a man named Marcus. Believing he was in the secure cone of silence of his car, he spoke freely, and I listened. "Marcus," Thorne said, his voice raw with stress. "We need to talk about the Lisa situation, post-Blackwood." "The agreement is solid, Julian," the lawyer replied, his voice tinny through the car's speakers. 10% of the sale price, non-negotiable. She signed it. "I know she signed it," Thorne snapped. "But she's getting greedy. She's starting to make noise about being a co-founder. What if she makes a scene? Blackwood gets spooked by any hint of legal trouble." There was a pause. Then Marcus's voice dropped. "Saying then we need to make sure she can't. I've been looking into her background, the sources of her income before she met the original programmer. It's not exactly clean. There are connections to some less than reputable art dealing, potential tax evasion. It's not enough to convict, but it's enough to bury her in legal fees and public humiliation if she gets loud. It's our insurance policy." "Good," Thorne breathed, a wave of relief in his voice. "Have it ready. The moment the Blackwood ink is dry, we cut her loose. And if she fights, we burn her to the ground." I saved the 3-minute, 47-second audio file. It was the perfect weapon. A declaration of war from a man who didn't know his enemy was listening to his every word. But I wasn't going to give it to Lisa. Not yet. Giving it to her now would just start a messy, premature legal battle. I needed to let the drama play out on a much grander stage. My plan wasn't to expose one of them to the other. It was to expose them both to the world, simultaneously. Instead, I used the information to sharpen another blade. I knew Thorne planned to marginalize Lisa. What I found next, in Lisa's own deleted emails, was her countermove. She had been secretly communicating with Ethelred's biggest competitor, a tech giant called Omnicorp. She was offering them a deal in exchange for a lucrative executive position and a massive signing bonus. She would provide them with a detailed roadmap of Prometheus's core weaknesses and a sworn affidavit detailing Thorne's fraudulent business practices. She was preparing to burn Thorne's kingdom down for a seat at another king's table. It was beautifully, poetically corrupt. The two of them, locked in a death spiral of mutual betrayal, each sharpening a knife in the dark, thinking they were the predator. I now held both knives. The audio of Thorne's plan to destroy Lisa. The evidence of Lisa's plan to sell Thorne out to his worst enemy. Their whole sordid enterprise was a house of cards, and I was holding the two cards that kept the entire structure from collapsing. The date for the final presentation to Blackwood Capital was set. It would be held in their boardroom on the 50th floor of a skyscraper in downtown San Francisco. It was to be Thorne's coronation. I began my own preparations. I wasn't just planning a data dump. I was scripting a theatrical production. A tragedy in 3 acts, with a captive audience and 2 villains who were about to discover they were not the heroes of their own story. The stage was set. The final scene was written. All that was left was to raise the curtain. The Blackwood Capital boardroom was a temple of money and power. A sterile, glass-walled cage 50 floors above San Francisco, offering a panoramic view of the bay that seemed to declare dominion over everything it surveyed. The air was thin, cold, and smelled faintly of expensive leather and corporate ruthlessness. I was there, of course, not in person, but in spirit, a digital godhead observing my creation from a dozen different perspectives. My consciousness was in the room's smart TV, in the Wi-Fi router, in the CEO's personal tablet, and most importantly, in the presentation laptop Julian Thorne was about to use to seal his glorious future. Thorne stood at the head of a massive mahogany table, a picture of controlled confidence. He wore a ridiculously expensive suit, tailored to make him look more like a warrior than a tech CEO. Across from him sat the 5 partners of Blackwood Capital, 5 sharks in bespoke suits, their faces impassive, their eyes missing nothing. And there, in a chair slightly behind and to the right of Thorne, was Lisa. She was radiant, playing the part of the proud, brilliant partner. She wore a dress the color of blood, a slash of defiant crimson in the room's muted palette of grays and blues. She smiled at Thorne, a perfect, predatory smile that didn't reach her eyes. I could feel the coiled tension between them, an invisible hum of mutual treachery. They thought they were on the verge of the greatest triumph of their lives. They were actually standing on a trapdoor. "Gentlemen," Thorne began, his voice a smooth, confident baritone that filled the room. "What we are about to show you is not just an evolution. It is a revolution. A technology that will redefine the very nature of human potential." He clicked the remote. The massive 8K screen behind him flickered to life, displaying the Ethelred logo. This was my cue. In my Oakland loft, my fingers rested on my keyboard. The script I had written was loaded. The payload was ready. Thorne launched into his pitch, a masterful performance of vision and ambition. He spoke of market disruption, of trillion-dollar valuations, of a future forged by Prometheus. The Blackwood partners listened, motionless. Lisa watched him, her smile unwavering, a silent partner in the grand deception. He arrived at the grand finale, the live demonstration. "But why talk about the future?" he said with a theatrical flourish, "when I can show it to you right now." He nodded to an engineer who wheeled in the demo station. The plan was to have their test subject use Prometheus to pilot a swarm of virtual drones through a complex urban environment, a display of fine motor control and intuitive command that was supposed to be dazzling. "Our technology is built on a foundation of absolute transparency and trust," Thorne declared, his voice ringing with false sincerity as the demo began. "A seamless bond between man and machine." That's the key word, I thought. In the loft, I pressed enter. The execution was instantaneous. On the massive screen behind Thorne, the drone simulation vanished. For a single, heart-stopping second, the screen went black. The silence in the room was absolute. Then, it lit up again. But instead of the Ethelred logo, there was a simple, clean timeline. It was dated, starting 2 years ago. At the top, in stark white letters, a title appeared: Project Chimera, a True Chronology. Thorne froze. He stared at the screen, his face a mask of confusion, then dawning horror. He fumbled with the remote, but it was useless. I owned the system. He was no longer the presenter. He was the subject. The first entry on the timeline appeared, a screenshot of Lisa's first email to Thorne. Subject, Mark Sterling's project. The text was crystal clear. "Julian, we need to talk. I think my husband is sitting on the next Google and he has no idea what to do with it." a collective, sharp intake of breath from the Blackwood partners. Lisa's face went white. The blood red of her dress suddenly seemed garish, obscene. The timeline began to scroll, automatically, methodically. A new entry every 5 seconds, a greatest hits of their betrayal. A photograph of my whiteboard, covered in my equations, sent from Lisa's phone to Thorne's. A snippet of their text exchange, Julian. Is he still locked in his cave? Lisa, of course, it's almost pathetic. Bank statements from the offshore account Thorne set up for Lisa, showing the first deposit of $250,000. Then, the audio began to play. My own voice captured by Lisa's phone, excitedly explaining the final breakthrough. And then, the tinny sound of Thorne's voice from the recording in his car filled the silent boardroom. The moment the Blackwood ink is dry, we cut her loose, and if she fights, we burn her to the ground. Lisa shot to her feet, her face contorted with a mixture of fury and terror. She stared at Thorne, a low, guttural sound escaping her lips. Thorne, for his part, looked like he had been turned to stone. His tan had been replaced by a pasty, greenish pallor. But I wasn't finished. The timeline accelerated. Financial spreadsheets appeared on the screen, side by side. On the left, Ethelred's real, dismal numbers. On the right, the doctored version they had just presented to Blackwood, with the fraudulent figures highlighted in glowing red. An email from Lisa to her contact at Omnicorp, Ethelred's chief competitor, with the subject line, Acquisition of Proprietary Ethelred IP. The final exhibit appeared on the screen. It was a single, high-resolution photo, a picture of me, the new me, taken from a security camera as I walked into a coffee shop in Oakland that morning. I was looking directly at the camera. My face was calm, my eyes cold and clear. Below the photo, a final line of text burned onto the screen. You stole the code, but you forgot about the architect. Judgment has been rendered. The presentation ended. The screen went black. The silence that followed was heavier, more profound than any sound. It was the sound of an empire collapsing into a black hole. One of the Blackwood partners, a man with silver hair and eyes like a reptile, slowly picked up his phone from the table. He didn't look at Thorne or Lisa. He looked at the head of his security detail, who was standing by the door. "Carl," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of absolute authority. "Lock the room and call the SEC. Then call the police." Thorne finally moved. He made a strange, strangled noise and collapsed into his chair, his head in his hands. Lisa just stood there, frozen, a statue of ruin in a blood-red dress, staring at the blank screen as if it held the ghost of her entire future. They hadn't just lost. They had been deconstructed, vivisected, and displayed for the world to see, using the very technology they had stolen to do it. The system they had corrupted had, in the end, been the instrument of their own perfect, logical, and inescapable execution. I didn't stay to watch the immediate, messy human drama unfold in that boardroom. My work was done. The algorithm I had launched was now self-executing, its results cascading through the real world with the beautiful, inevitable logic of physics. In the quiet of my Oakland loft, I closed the dozen windows on my screen that had been my eyes and ears inside their world. The show was over. Now, I would simply observe the fallout. The first news alert hit my feed 67 minutes later. A stark banner from Bloomberg, Ethelred Innovations CEO Julian Thorne detained following dramatic confrontation at Blackwood Capital HQ. It was a trickle that quickly became a flood. The Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, TechCrunch. The story was everywhere, a wildfire tearing through the digital landscape. The initial reports were confused, chaotic, citing anonymous sources speaking of a shocking presentation, allegations of massive fraud, and a corporate espionage scandal of unprecedented scale. I watched it all with the detached interest of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. There was no elation, no fist-pumping triumph. There was only the quiet, profound satisfaction of a complex problem solved. The hum of my servers was the only sound in the room, a steady, reassuring thrum. It was the sound of a system returning to a stable state. Thorne's perp walk was the lead story on the evening news. The man I had watched preening in his office, practicing his confident smirks in the mirror, was now a hollowed-out shell. His ridiculously expensive suit was rumpled, his face ashen, his hands cuffed behind his back. The swagger was gone, replaced by the shambling, broken gait of a man whose operating system had been wiped clean. He was a symbol, a cautionary tale for the ages, and he had no idea that his destroyer was watching him from a few miles across the bay, sipping a cup of cheap coffee. Lisa's fate was quieter, but in many ways, more complete. She was not immediately arrested. Her crimes were more nuanced, a spiderweb of conspiracy and breach of trust. But in the court of Silicon Valley opinion, her sentence was handed down instantly and without appeal. She was radioactive. The story of her betrayal, confirmed by a dozen sources from within Ethelred, made her a pariah. No company would touch her. No investor would take her call. I watched her digital life evaporate. Her social media went dark. Her credit cards were declined. The last I saw, through a public traffic camera, was her car, packed with boxes, leaving the Palo Alto house, our house, in the dead of night. She wasn't just ruined, she was erased, a ghost haunting the ruins of a life she tried to steal. The narrative the media settled on was one of a mysterious, brilliant hacker, a digital ghost, who had exacted a form of corporate vigilante justice. They called me the Architect, a name I found grimly appropriate. No one connected the ghost to the broken, reclusive genius Mark Sterling, who was presumed to be licking his wounds in some forgotten corner of the world, if he was even still alive. I had successfully uncoupled my old identity from my new reality. Mark Sterling was a victim. The Architect was an act of God. A few weeks later, when the noise had died down to a dull roar, I performed the final step. In my basement in Palo Alto, the Chimera servers were still humming, the heart of my creation still beating. I drove there late one night. The house was empty, a hollow monument to a fraudulent life, already seized as a corporate asset. I bypassed the security, my thumbprint still granting me access, and walked down into the cold, familiar air of my old sanctuary. On a secure drive, I had the entire archive of my operation. Every piece of evidence, every recorded call, every stolen email, the complete record of their downfall. I could have held on to it forever, a trophy of my victory. Instead, I initiated a secure wipe protocol. A military-grade 7-pass erasure that would not just delete the data, but overwrite it with random noise until not a single ghost of a byte remained. It took 17 minutes. I stood there in the dark, watching the progress bar crawl across the screen, and I felt nothing but a sense of finality. The data had served its purpose. The algorithm of their self-destruction had run its course. Clinging to the evidence would be an emotional act, and I was done with emotion. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is a chaotic, human impulse. This was a recompilation of justice, a hard reset of a corrupted system. I had watched two predators tear at the world, believing they were lions. But my surveillance had taught me the truth. They weren't lions. They were just scavengers who got too close to a sleeping god. And the god had woken up. With the wreckage of Ethelred still smoldering in the headlines, the question of the technology itself hung in the air. Project Prometheus was now synonymous with fraud and scandal, its codebase impounded as evidence in a massive federal investigation. It was a tainted asset, a brilliant piece of engineering rendered worthless by the sins of its thieves. The world believed the revolution had been a lie. This was by design. My design. While the world was distracted by the fireworks of Thorne's and Lisa's public immolation, my real work was happening quietly, in the sterile, anonymous world of intellectual property law. Months before I launched my final assault, I had laid the groundwork. I formed a new, Delaware-based C corporation. It had the most generic, forgettable name I could devise: Thesis Dynamics, Inc. Its corporate structure was an onion of legal firewalls and anonymous registered agents, making it virtually impossible to trace its ownership back to a single individual. Thesis Dynamics had no office, no employees, no public profile. It existed only on paper and in a handful of secure servers. To represent this ghost corporation, I hired a law firm in Washington, D.C., that specialized in complex, high-stakes patent litigation. I never met them in person. All our communications were conducted through encrypted channels, with me posing as the reclusive, eccentric chairman of Thesis Dynamics. I paid them with cryptocurrency funneled through a dozen mixers, making the source of the funds untraceable. They didn't ask questions. Their retainer was large enough to purchase their discretion. My instructions to them were simple and precise. They were to prepare a comprehensive patent application for a neural interface technology. The application I provided them was a work of art. It was not just the code of Chimera, but a 500-page document detailing its entire theoretical framework, its philosophical underpinnings, and its potential applications, from medicine to global logistics. It was the master blueprint, a document so detailed and prescient that only the original creator could have produced it. Crucially, the application was supported by a mountain of evidence. I gave my lawyers time-stamped digital logs from my original servers, showing years of development work. I provided early-stage schematics and code repositories that predated Ethelred's existence, and I gave them a single, devastating piece of evidence, a digitally watermarked version of the core kernel, a unique, invisible signature I had embedded in the original code. A signature that was still present in the version Ethelred had tried to claim as their own. It was the digital equivalent of a signed painting. We didn't file immediately. We waited. We watched the Ethelred drama unfold. We let their provisional patent for Prometheus become a public record, forever tying their names to the stolen code. Then, 2 weeks after Thorne's arrest, my lawyers acted. They didn't just file for a new patent. They filed a lawsuit against the now bankrupt estate of Ethelred Innovations, claiming massive intellectual property theft. and they filed a formal challenge with the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office to invalidate the Prometheus patent. The legal battle was a slaughter. Ethelred's estate had no defense. The evidence was irrefutable, a digital smoking gun. The time-stamped logs, the watermarked code, it was an open and shut case. The Prometheus patent was summarily invalidated. The narrative in the tech world shifted overnight. The mysterious architect wasn't just a hacker. He was clearly connected to the original wronged inventor. But who was he? And who was Thesis Dynamics? The speculation was rampant, but no one found the answer. I was a ghost, and my company was a shadow. 6 months later, a thick manila envelope arrived at the secure post office box I had set up for Thesis Dynamics. Inside, sealed with the official stamp of the United States Patent and Trademark Office, was patent number 11382-508, the rights to a system and method for adaptive neural interfacing. My work, my soul. It was no longer Project Chimera. It was now the sole protected property of a faceless corporation I controlled completely. I stood in my new office, a clean, minimalist space I had leased under the company name in a nondescript building in San Jose, and looked at the document. It wasn't a trophy. It was a tool, a key. The world thought the technology was dead, buried under a mountain of scandal. They were wrong. It was merely dormant, waiting. I had cleansed it of its corruption. I had reclaimed its ownership. I had taken back what was mine, not through force or fury, but through superior logic and flawless execution. The board was now clear. The pieces were reset, and this time, I would be the one to make the first move. The sun streams through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, a stark, minimalist space on the 34th floor of a glass tower in San Jose. Below me, the intricate lattice of Silicon Valley spreads out like a circuit board, humming with the traffic of a million lives, a million ambitions. It's a far cry from the subterranean darkness of my old basement. I haven't set foot in a basement since. I've come to appreciate the view from above. It offers a certain clarity. I am no longer the architect, the vengeful ghost in the machine. That persona, like the Mark Sterling persona before it, was a tool for a specific task. The task is complete. I have integrated both. I am simply the chairman and sole shareholder of Thesis Dynamics, a quiet company with a single, infinitely valuable patent to its name. The world doesn't know my face. They know my work. And soon, they will know it on my terms. I don't think about Thorn or Lisa, not anymore. They are not objects of hatred. They are data points. They were a necessary vulnerability, an exploit in my own source code that had to be found and patched. My old operating system was built on a flawed premise, that the world, like a machine, would operate on a set of logical, predictable rules. Their betrayal was the ultimate debugging process. It taught me the fundamental difference between the systems I create and the systems people live in. Machines are complex, but they are honest. Their logic is pure. A bug is a bug. A command is a command. They do not lie. They do not flatter. They do not betray. Humans are the opposite. They are simple systems wrapped in layers of chaotic, irrational, and often malicious code. Greed, ego, fear, love, these are the high-level programming languages of humanity. And I have become a fluent speaker. I could have retired. I could have licensed the technology, become another anonymous billionaire, and disappeared. But creation is not my hobby. It is my core function. And Chimera was only the beginning. It was a tool to bridge the gap between man and machine. What I see now is the need for a tool to bridge the gap between man and reality. My phone buzzes. It's a message from a consortium of venture capitalists, the third this week, offering a 9-figure sum just for a meeting. I ignore it. They see a patent, a product. They don't see the true potential. They want to build better tools for social media, for advertising, for war. They are still thinking in the old language. I open my laptop. The screen is a clean, empty slate. For a moment, I just look at it. The possibilities branching out into infinity. The rage is gone. The pain is a scar, a reminder of a lesson learned. What remains is a quiet, absolute control. I am no longer a ghost reacting to the actions of others. I'm the prime mover. I spent half my life creating a code to understand machines. The betrayal taught me how to write a code to manage people. They thought they stole my project. They believed they had taken my future, my very identity. But they were just the first line of code in my new one. A project where I set the rules. My fingers find the keyboard. The familiar rhythmic click fills the quiet office. I begin to type.